you, Willie. And thank you for inviting me back. It's always a good sign when you get invited back somewhere because it means you maybe did all right the first time. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I wanted to say that the Baptist Joint Committee, whose video you just watched, and which is the organization that is currently hosting Annette in Virginia, is my own traveling story. I haven't really designed my sermon around your traveling stories theme, I'll have to admit. Annette told me, and I was like, that's great, I'm already there. So, but for me, it is my own traveling story. I learned about that organization when I was in 7th grade. I did a National History Day project. And my project was on the sort of divisions and the breakup in the Southern Baptist Convention over the ordination of women in the 80s and a number of other hot-button cultural issues. And the Baptist Joint Committee was really the only one of the agencies that had been founded by the Southern Baptist Convention to retain its independence and to say clearly to the rest of the Baptist world what was going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so the home from which I come is a home that is very thankful to the Baptist Joint Committee for standing up in courage at a time when Baptist life, especially in the American South, desperately needed it. And so they are very near to my heart. I serve on the board. And so when Annette asked me to come and speak today while she was doing stuff for the Baptist Joint Committee, and on this day, which is recognized nationally as Religious Freedom Sunday, it was a real pleasure to be able to say yes and come to speak to you today. So I am so happy to be filling in your pulpit this morning. Sisters and brothers and siblings, would you join me in prayer? God above, may the words of my mouth and may the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God. For you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I want you to imagine with me for a little bit the promises that Rome made to its citizens. The promises Rome made to its citizens. You could walk from Rome to Venice. You could walk up around the Aegean from Venice into Thessaloniki. You could walk down through Constantinople. You could walk all the way down to Jerusalem. And you had a promise of safety. You are a citizen of Rome. No one will accost you. No bandit will grab you. You don't have to walk through a hostile nation that would dare stand up to the Roman legions. And you'd get good circuses. You'd be able to go down to the Colosseum and watch a gladiatorial match. Or you'd be able to go to the Hippodrome and watch horses and chariots whirl around those massive, massive fields. It's like ancient NASCAR. Or you'd be able to simply have clean, running drinking water. I've traveled around a little bit in Italy, and you can still find fountains built in the Roman times which are marked potable. You can still stick your hand in them and drink them. I wasn't always courageous enough to do that. I didn't always trust it, but others seemed to be fine. They lasted. You built aqueducts that could carry water everywhere, sewers that could carry away waste, infrastructure and administration and protection. You had so much promised to you as a citizen of Rome. But it was an order that came with a cost. Because if you weren't a citizen of Rome, if you were one of Rome's subject peoples, you might have some of the benefits. They built aqueducts and everyone could share in the potable water supply. But the process of Rome conquering your area meant that you might have had sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers taken from you into Roman slavery. There's an adage of Christ where he says when someone gives you their pack and makes you walk a mile, you should walk a second mile. That's not just a saying. There was actually a Roman practice where if a soldier on the march needed to grab a citizen to make them carry their pack, they could. And they were legally entitled to ask you to carry it for a mile. Legally entitled to ask you to carry it for a mile. Imagine, you've got to get gas, and you go down to the gas station, you plug in your car, and a soldier comes along and says, "Here, I've got this gear, walk a mile in my gear." Wouldn't be too happy about that situation. It disrupts your whole day. You're just trying to get to work. You're just trying to get home to feed your family, and suddenly you have to walk a mile with someone else's stuff. This order came at a cost. And if your country, if your nation, if your people had the temerity to question this order in any way, standards bearing the Roman eagle would swoop down from wherever the garrison was. They would level your temples. They would level your buildings. They would sow your fields with salt. And they would ensure that you would never question the might of Rome again. Roman order was what was at stake, sisters and brothers and siblings, when they hung Jesus Christ on the cross. That was what was at stake. Rome's fear that the slightest disturbance would cause everything to fall. Additionally, it was the fear of Jewish people that Rome would come down hard and hurt their children, hurt their fathers, hurt their mothers, enslave them, that led them to accede to the death of Christ when Rome sought to do what they did. Paul was very aware of all this. Paul is actually a great example of someone who knew exactly what it was like to be subject to imperial order. When we read him in Romans, he's at what's often considered to be his most mature rhetorical heights. So he's towards the end of his long life and career, but he's been in Roman jails. He's written letters in Roman jails. He knows what it means to be, as he says in the passage, subject to the governing authorities. He understands order. And yet still he writes this text, this letter, which says, "Be subject to the governing authorities, for you have nothing to fear if you've done nothing wrong." And yet here's a man who has had plenty to fear. He's been in the jails for doing nothing wrong but standing on the street corner and talking about the life of Christ. And that is a through thread in Christian history that goes well beyond Paul. I'm going to skip a little bit of time. We could talk about the Middle Ages, we could talk about the Reformation, but I'm going to skip straight ahead to the American experience at the start of the American experiment and the colonization of America. We have folks like Obadiah Holmes. Obadiah Holmes was a Baptist pastor repeatedly thrown into jail by the Massachusetts Bay Colony. You know, we like to think about these Puritans coming over to America for religious liberty, but it was religious liberty for one very narrow kind of religious person. It was religious liberty for people who had tossed off the Episcopal Church and decided on an extremely pure and narrow kind of interpretation. And so when Baptists came along and started to say that people had freedom of conscience and could worship as they pleased and could be baptized as they pleased, well, boy, the Puritans suddenly found that was a bridge too far. So they threw all these Baptist preachers into prison. Obadiah Holmes, Isaac Backus is quoted in your bulletin today. He's one of those who saw the inside of a prison cell for choosing to follow Christ. And choosing to follow Christ with a specific kind of Baptist interpretation on that. Over in England, around the same time, we have other Baptist pioneers. One of them was named Thomas Helwys. Now, Thomas Helwys had fled with his good friend John Smythe to Holland, where they could form and build their own communities. And then Smith and Helwys had a falling out. Baptist churches are known to multiply by dividing, and so they had that great first schism of the Baptist church. And so Helwys leaves Holland, can't stay in Holland anymore. And on his trip back, on the boat, he writes a little treatise on sin. I've tried to read it. It's very boring. It's not very good. It's just sort of like theological piddle. But in the beginning of that, knowing where he's headed, he writes a little missive. It's a handwritten note that he writes in the copy that he's preparing. And this is the copy he's going to send to the king. Very common at that time for whenever you wrote a book, you would send a copy to the king. The king may not read it, but it's a recognition of the king's authority, and you hope maybe the king will say something about it, and you'll sell 1 million copies. But what Thomas Helwys wrote is, "Herefore do I declare that the king is a mortal man and not God, and has no right to rule in the eternal lives of his subjects, be they Jew, Greek, Christian, slave, free, Mohammedan, an old term for Muslim, or no religion whatsoever." So at a time when the king claimed the right to appoint bishops, to appoint the church, to step up and create the church, Thomas Helwys, on the copy he's going to mail the guy, writes in there, "You have no right to do this. You are not God. You are going to die and find yourself in the ground like every one of us. And it is my right to worship as I wish. It is the right of a Muslim in our country to worship as they wish. It is the right of someone who has no religion at all to go about their lives paying no taxes to you, King John, and instead living their life as they see fit." And boy howdy, when he landed in England, did he get thrown in Newgate Prison faster than you can snap. And he died there the same year that King John published that famous, King James published that famous King James Bible. And so anytime someone tells you, as a Baptist, that the King James is the only acceptable publication of the Bible, remind them that King James murdered the first English pastor of Baptist extraction in England. So why this praise of order? I could talk all day about Clarence Jordan. I have a whole list if I can get to them. John Leland, Clarence Jordan, Martin Luther King Jr., any number of Baptist preachers who defied order to the point of their death. And yet here we have St. Paul saying, don't do it. Yet it seems like Baptists didn't get the message, right? Like it seems like they are constantly at odds with order. So let's talk a little bit about it. First, there are some good things about order, to be sure. You know, I mentioned the fountains, drinking water for people. Great, keeps people alive. Love order. We have a whole remarkable international system. I was reading an article the other day about Brexit. And there are certain ways that if Brexit goes forward the wrong way, England could be out of food in like 5 days. Like the speed that they've required now to develop the sort of international arrangements where certain food is checked, other food is understood to be coming from a safe place, all those arrangements, they collapse. That order vanishes. People start starving. Like, I don't want you to come out of this thinking that we need to march down to City Hall and burn it down. Because City Hall, government, maintains a kind of space in which life can flourish. So I think St. Paul recognized that. He understands that. He understands that if Rome collapses tomorrow, you know, the people in charge aren't going to be great after that. They're going to be Visigothic hordes ready to tear things apart, and things aren't going to be better for anyone. He understands the need for order. But he also is coming from a place of persecution, right? In Latin America, in the sort of various wars in Central America, civil wars, conflicts between communist guerrillas, conflicts between sort of right-wing murderous regimes, all those troubles. If you were walking around with your Bible, and you got stopped at a checkpoint, and the policeman was holding out his hand and said, "Let me see what book you have there." Touches the Bible, opens up. You have the Magnificat highlighted. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud, even the arrogant of heart, and the rich he has sent empty away. you could get locked up for that. Woe to you rich, for you will be hungry. In Luke, you have that highlighted, you disappear. And so how beneficial could it be for Christians in first century Jerusalem and Rome, to which this letter is being written, to have a nice passage they can highlight? For when the Roman emperor, his agent on earth, the centurion, stops you and demands to see what that scroll you have is, and open up, oh, you have underlined here, be ye subject to the governing authorities. You're good, you can go. It's a useful little thing to undercut persecution. But I want to talk a little bit about rhetoric, because I think what Paul does here is very clever. Very clever, because he talks at length about order. Remember, Paul at this point is a mature rhetorician. He has read his Horace. He's read his Cicero. He understands what it means to persuade people. And he concludes his whole paean to authority with, pay to all what is due them. Taxes, to whom taxes are due. Revenue, to whom revenue is due. Respect, to whom respect is due. Honor, to whom honor is due. And when I hear the word due a whole lot of times, I started to get anxious because I started thinking about my credit card payment and my due date. Because what is a due date? What does it mean to have something due? It means you owe a debt. It means someone has lent you something and you owe them an obligation in return. And what does St. Paul say immediately after pay to everyone what they are due? He says, owe no one anything. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment, any other obligation, any other thing you owe, are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. I think the reason Paul can write a good 7 verses of obey the governing authorities, do what they tell you, they're put there for order, obey the order, is because Paul understands that if you are instituted and appointed for order alone, you are not instituted as a Christian. Christians have been instituted and appointed on this earth for things so much greater and bigger and bolder and braver and more hopeful and more loving and more powerful than the mere maintenance of order. We have been put here on this earth. God has called this community together to love. That is so much more important. You might have to think about order along the way. You don't get a building like this where people can worship every week, whether it's raining or it's hot or anything like that. You don't get something like that without someone doing some logistics, right? Order is a part of what we do. But if we end there, all the beauty, all the glory, all the hope, all the courage that exists within this space drains away, and you are left with a building and not a church. So what do we do? How do we move forward knowing that we are called to greater things? I would say first that we start with love. That we see and we strive to hold and know and understand one another, even our enemies. You know, we are divided enough demographically right now in this country that I think all of you can look at me. Like I'm a gay man who lives in Chicago who has an exhaustive graduate education. And I use exhaustive to mean like I want to lie down and sleep when I think about the education I've had. And you can probably make some educated judgments based on those demographic things about what I believe politically and who I vote for. So I don't need to tell you that, right? I don't need to give you the litany of the social justice things I believe about separating children from their parents. You can guess, right? But what I do want you to hear is that as a Christian, it is incumbent upon me to pay as much attention to friends of mine who don't have those same things. Friends of mine who struggle in coal mining countries. Friends of mine who live out in the suburbs and have a different set of life experiences than me. And who maybe voted differently than me and believe differently than me. We can fight about that all day long outside of this building. But inside this building, we have to find a way to love one another and talk to one another and see each other as human beings. And one of the things that takes is the second thing that I think Paul wants his church and God's church on this earth to be like. And that is courage. Courage. It is a time in our country right now for fear that will take my breath away. Takes my breath away. I watch as transgender friends of mine are having their passports taken back by the State Department to reassign their gender. And it is fear that takes my breath away, and all I want to do as a human being is say, absolutely not. You are excluded from the community if you believe this, and you are out of here. That's all I want to do. But I think about St. Paul's experience in prison. When he's in prison with, I believe, Barnaby, and there's a massive earthquake, and the prison door flies open, and all the prisoners are starting to leave, and the guard takes his sword and is about to jump on it. And what does St. Paul do? He says, "What are you doing?" And the guard says, "Oh, all the prisoners are going to escape. So I have to fall on my sword because they're going to kill me. It's going to be shame upon my family, so I'm just going to kill myself now." St. Paul says, "No, don't do that. We will stay." That's courage. That's courage. Because boy, is it scary. Is it scary? You just want to exclude that man. You were a guard. Screw you, buddy. Jump on your sword. I'm getting out of here. You imprisoned me for nothing. But love does no wrongdoing to another. That's what Romans says. And it would have been wrongdoing for St. Paul to flee when someone's life like that was on the line. And so we have to find courage to own up to the fact that we might find ourselves in jail, we might find ourselves in prison, we might find ourselves struggling, we might find ourselves on the outs when we stand up for Christ. When we bind ourselves bodily to the engine of destruction that tears families apart. We might have to pay up for that. But we do it in a way that says that we love even those committing the action. And that we care for them, and we struggle to be Christians precisely so that God can save all the world and not just the slice of it that we care about. And we have to do this in a community. We have to do this together. We have to move forward face to face. We can't do it on the internet. We can invite people to come to a face-to-face event on the internet. We can make new friends on the internet that we invite to come in. But we have to do it in a place where we're able to see and hear and listen to each other. Because the kind of love that's going to break apart these temptations to see law and order as the only good in the world, that kind of love is only going to happen when we're able to see and talk with one another. And so my prayer today for us, my prayer today for the work we have left to do in this world, is that we will be ready when the time comes. I pray that each of you will find a way wherever you can to stand up for love. Stand up for a community. Stand up in courage. When you see people you know doing things that are horrible in the name of order, know this, that you are called to be greater than that. And you are called to speak up against that and to stand up against that in a way that still holds on to that person's humanity, calls them to grow, calls them to be better, in the hopes that the whole fabric of our national, our church, our state community can be stronger and more durable and more resilient in the face of the fears and terrors that tear it apart. And I also pray that as you do this, that I will have the strength to do what you do. That I will be able to be there too. That your preachers, your teachers, those who you trust, will be able to hold your hand as you do it as well. Listen to Pastor Annette. She has good things to say to you and to help you with. She's learning great things, teaching great things among you, and she can be a partner on this journey as well. One of y'all was telling me, part of me, I can't recall who, that one of the key things that he does is when he has a call where firefighters or emergency medical responders are responding to someone who's in the middle of an opioid crisis. He reaches out to Annette in the hopes that she's free that day and she can come help, that she can come be there, that she can come hold. Because, an opioid crisis, that's someone who has defied order, defied law, but still the Christian response is to come and to hold and to be there and to be God, to be Christ in that moment. And so I pray that we will listen to the gospel and remember that we are called for greater things, called to bigger things, and that through Christ, through our communities, through our leaders and our teachers, and through our commitment to love one another, we can succeed at those big things and one day stand at a heavenly banquet where all are fed and all are welcome and all are made whole. This is the mission of Christ. This is the good news of the gospel. Thanks be to God.